Chapter 1. What is good? No one is good but one, that is, God. Mark 10:18. Everything in the universe is good to the degree it conforms to the nature of God, and evil as it fails to do so. A.W. Tozier. Good and evil. We all know the difference, right? Aren't we born into this world with an inherent knowledge of what is right and wrong? I've often heard people say that human beings are inherently good. Is that true? We know that the movies, documentaries, and other programs that warm our hearts are those highlighting the goodness of humankind. I don't know of any story, novel, or movie that's gained massive popularity in which evil triumphs over good. We all grew up watching the good guys go through tough challenges. The odds were stacked against them, and they faced inevitable defeat, often right up to the very end. But suddenly, our heroes broke through to victory or justice. We anticipated and applauded these finales. We expected good to always win out because, after all, God is on the side of good, right? In recent years, producers and networks initiated a trend when they introduced reality television shows featuring makeovers. It began with shows about fixing up a struggling family's home. We sat glued to our televisions, admiring the excitement and generosity of the philanthropists in their outreach to the poor and needy. We anticipated the shock of those who benefited, then teared up in that climactic moment when the poor souls beheld their refurbished house. Then came another show that helped losers struggling with obesity lose large amounts of weight, while still other programs helped with dress, hair, makeup, and more. Soon afterwards, celebrities joined the trend. Recognized artists made a way for those who otherwise would have had no opportunity to showcase their voices or dancing skills. We cheered as we witnessed the unknown candidate given the chance to become a sensational star overnight. What kindness, what generosity, what goodwill. Any program about highlighting benevolence, protecting the innocent, or sacrificing time to help the underdog grew in popularity. Included in our list of reality viewing were shows about police or bounty hunters apprehending evil criminals. These too became some of the most watched programs. To sum it all up, our entertainment is often centered on the good of humanity. Sales and Marketing 101 teaches us that a product must feel, look, sound, taste, or smell good in order to succeed in the marketplace. It must elevate the consumer's senses or emotions to a better and happier state. We know that good items will sell. After all, who would want to purchase something bad? And only the twisted people would desire to procure evil. We hear comments such as, "He's a good man," or "She's a good woman," and we normally accept this evaluation at face value. The vulnerable quickly let down their guard and embrace every statement or action from those proclaimed to be good as safe and trustworthy. But are these assessments always accurate? Could we ever fall into a delusional state of calling what's right wrong, or what's wrong right? Doesn't everybody know the difference? And we certainly could never fall into the deceived state of calling good evil or evil good, correct? Consider this. Many centuries ago, a wealthy young leader approached Jesus Christ. He was an honest and morally pure man. He'd never committed adultery, murdered, lied, stolen, or cheated someone in a business deal. He had always respected his parents. He was a model citizen and was most likely admired by many. He honored Jesus with the greeting of, "Good teacher." This was a leader speaking to another leader, one good man appealing to another good man. He sought common ground with the notable teacher he'd never personally met. Perhaps he reasoned within himself, if I cajole the heart of this prophet by appealing to his goodness, I'll convince him to give me a favorable response to my inquiry. However, before Jesus acknowledged his question, he first countered, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is, God." Mark 10:18. Why would Jesus correct a man who called him good? Was Jesus not good? Of course he was. So why did he say this? Could it have been that good was the wrong standard of judgment? In other words, is it possible that man's standard of what is good is different from God's standard? If you or I were to put ourselves in this man's shoes, how would we have fared if we had greeted Jesus as good teacher? I can answer for myself. After being a child of God for years, reading through my Bible more than once, studying Scripture for hours, praying daily, and even being in full-time ministry and authoring a few best-selling Christian books, I would have received the same response as the wealthy young leader. Jesus would have said, "John, why do you call me good?" in exactly the same manner. How do I know this? The Spirit of God has dealt with me similarly to the way Jesus did with this ruler. Shocking news. Let me explain. In the late 1990s, I flew to Sweden for a conference. It was an overnight flight that landed in Stockholm early in the morning. After landing, grabbing my bags, and clearing customs, I was met and warmly greeted by my Swedish host. Before we exited the terminal, he informed me of what would become the news story of the year, and quite possibly the decade. He said, "John, a very tragic thing happened last night while you were flying here, so you probably don't know. Let me update you." "What happened?" I asked, both alarmed and curious. My host told me about the fatal automobile accident that had occurred just a few hours earlier. One of the victims was possibly the most recognized and beloved person on the planet. Everything she did made news. My wife Lisa and I admired her charitable work and enjoyed reading articles about her in magazines and newspapers. I'm being a bit vulnerable here, but not only did I like the articles, I also loved the pictures that portrayed her life. Simply put, I was a big fan. Anytime a story involving her came on the news, I would stop what I was doing and pay attention. The news of this woman's death shocked me beyond words. She was a young mother with small children, in addition to being a vibrant stateswoman who was both smart and beautiful. She was using her worldwide influence to do a great amount of good for orphans and landmine victims in war-torn nations. That was enough to win my heart, but her attractive qualities went further. She loved and was always aware of her fans, greeting them with either a genuine smile or some other warm, personal acknowledgement. I was in shock and disbelief at the news of her passing. How could she be dead? How could this have happened? My host drove me to my hotel. The first thing I did when I walked into my room was to turn on the television. News reports about the accident were on every channel. I couldn't understand most of them because they were in Swedish. So I surfed the channels until I found CNN and BBC Sky News. I sat on the edge of my bed, bags still unpacked, in utter disbelief. The news reports showed thousands of mourners outside the woman's residence. People of all ages had gathered. The cameras showed them putting flowers on the gates while tears streamed down their faces. Many were embracing or huddling in groups praying. The world was in shock. For the next 4 days, this tragedy was featured on the front page of every newspaper in the free world. The reports of the accident, the investigation, her family's response, and the funeral dominated all media. Heads of state, world leaders, and hundreds of celebrities attended her memorial service, which was one of the most watched events in television history. That first day in Stockholm, I grieved hour after hour in my hotel room, struggling even to prepare for my upcoming evening service. My mind kept wandering to the questions I had, and I struggled with anger over the senseless events that had led to her death. Yet alongside the grief, I sensed a competing thought trying to come to the surface. I attempted to shake it off, but I couldn't. Finally, after several hours of sensing a discord between my emotions and my spirit, I got down on my knees at the end of my bed and prayed, "Father, I'm grieving over this woman's death. However, in my heart, I feel as if something is wrong. What's going on?" Almost immediately, I heard deep in my heart, "Read Revelations chapter 18. I had no idea what was in Revelations 18 because at the time, I'm sad to say, it was a book I had not studied much in depth. I opened my Bible and I began to read. My heart started racing when I got to the 7th verse. "In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as queen and am no widow, and will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord who judges her. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her. Revelations 18:7-9. I felt a flurry of emotion as soon as I read these verses. There were clear parallels between the woman described in the passage and the woman whose death was dominating the airwaves. It was as if a bucket of ice water had been thrown into my face. I felt shocked, bewildered, and confused. How could these scriptures in any way apply to this benevolent celebrity? It's important to point out that the Apostle John was not referring to any individual in these verses. This passage highlights a spirit that is pervasive in our fallen world. However, there was enough resemblance to the current situation that the Spirit of God used these scriptures to bring about a shift in my understanding. Have you ever had God use an account in Scripture to speak to a personal experience? That is what was happening here. The Spirit of God was challenging how I measured good in a way similar to what Jesus had done with the wealthy young leader. Aware of what I sensed God was revealing to me, I protested out loud in my hotel room. Lord, how could this scripture have anything to do with her? She did all kinds of humanitarian work with landmine victims and orphans, and she flaunted her defiance to authority and her adultery to the world. The Lord countered. She was not submitted to me.